Women don't always choose the best man. They choose the one who knows how to perform power the best. And that's why, over and over again, the throne is held by the loud fool in costume instead of the quiet philosopher in exile. You've seen it. You've probably felt it yourself. Think about it. The guy who walks into a room with nothing but confidence, no depth, no inner world, no profound thoughts, but somehow he pulls all the gravity toward himself. He moves like a king, not because he is one, but because he doesn't even realize he isn't. And while he's owning the room, the thoughtful, intelligent man fades into the background, not because he lacks value, but because he doesn't know how to display it in the right theater. Michel Foucault understood this paradox better than anyone. In his famous book, Discipline and Punish, he wrote, "Visibility is a trap. But here's the thing, the fool doesn't fear visibility. He craves it. He thrives in it. He lives in the spotlight, not because he deserves it, but because he doesn't question the morality of being seen. He doesn't analyze the stage. He just owns it." Foucault didn't see power as something you hold like a sword or a crown. He saw power as something that circulates, something that's performed and reproduced. He wrote, "Power is not an institution and not a structure. Neither is it a certain strength we are endowed with. It is the name that one attributes to a complex strategical situation in a particular society."
So when that so-called stupid man walks up to a high-value woman and says something bold, loud, or even ridiculous, he's not being irrational. He's running a strategy of power, whether he knows it or not. And in that moment, he wins. Not because he's smarter, but because he acts as though he is. Meanwhile, the intelligent man becomes a prisoner of the very thing that makes him intelligent, his own self-awareness. He monitors himself, he questions himself, he castrates himself. Foucault warned us about this. He said modern systems create what he called docile bodies, people who internalize surveillance, who self-regulate, who hesitate before acting. He wrote that a relation of surveillance is inscribed at the heart of the practice of teaching, not as an additional or adjacent part, but as a mechanism inherent to it. In other words, from the moment we were trained in school, we were taught to second-guess ourselves, to calculate before we speak, to rehearse before we act. And while you're still scripting the perfect sentence in your head, the fool is already laughing in her ear. In the theater of life, power doesn't belong to the brilliant. It belongs to the bold. The so-called stupid man is free, not because he's courageous, but because he's blind to the cages that hold you back. You see the walls, he just walks straight through them. He's unbothered, unapologetic, and unburdened by reflection. And that, according to Foucault, is one of the most dangerous forms of freedom.
In The History of Madness, Foucault wrote, "Freedom of conscience entails more dangers than authority and despotism." Why? Because the man who doesn't reflect dominates. He isn't distracted by his own inner contradictions. He doesn't sit around questioning his every move. And women, whether they admit it or not, are often drawn to that kind of undistracted power. The intelligent man collapses under the weight of all his self-reflection. The stupid man doesn't have that weight. And in a world where perception and dominance are everything, that makes him terrifyingly effective. This shatters one of the biggest illusions men grow up with, the belief that being a good man will naturally get you a good woman. That being thoughtful, emotionally aware, and intellectually sound will magnetize you to quality. But Foucault's reality is harsher. You're not rewarded for inner virtue. You're rewarded for your utility in systems of power.
And most of the time, the fool plays that system better. Not because he's more competent, but because he's more compliant with the performance. Women don't fall for fools because they actually want fools. They fall for them because these men know how to move through social structures with ease. They talk the talk. They play the role. They don't resist the performance. And in a world governed by optics, performance is power. Foucault told us that we now live in the society of the teacher-judge, the doctor-judge, the educator-judge, the social worker-judge. He said it's on them that the universal reign of the normative is based. In simpler terms, society runs on norms. And here's the kicker. The stupid man doesn't question those norms. He masters them. He doesn't sit back wondering if Instagram validation is fake. He dives right into it. He doesn't debate whether flexing wealth is shallow. He just flashes it. He doesn't ask if small talk is meaningless. He uses it to own the room. Meanwhile, the intelligent man watches all this in horror. He dissects, he judges, he steps back. And in stepping back, he steps out of visibility. He becomes a philosopher with no microphone, a sage whispering into a storm. And both the world and the woman walk right past him.
Foucault understood this invisibility. He called it the violence of normalization. The judges of normality are everywhere. We live in a society of the teacher-judge, the doctor-judge, the social worker-judge, all constantly measuring, evaluating, prescribing, and punishing. So what happens to the intelligent man? He gets pathologized. He feels wrong for being unsure, guilty for hesitating, out of sync for not performing masculinity in the language of aggression. And here's the cruel paradox. The stupid man, by sheer obliviousness, escapes this judgment. His ignorance is like armor. He doesn't realize there's even a test being graded, so he passes without stress. That's what women often feel when they're with him. A man untouched by anxiety. A man who doesn't flinch when challenged. A man who doesn't negotiate with himself before he expresses desire. And for a woman who's lived her whole life in a storm of judgment and comparison, his blindness feels like strength. Now consider how power really moves. In Power Knowledge, Foucault said, power is everywhere. Not because it embraces everything, but because it comes from everywhere. That's what makes the so-called stupid man dangerous. His power isn't centralized. It leaks through everything. Through laughter, through audacity, through volume, through the comfort of his own ignorance. And what woman doesn't want to stand beside power that feels effortless? While you, the intelligent man, are busy trying to earn her with logic, credentials, or carefully chosen words, he simply claims her with a smirk. You worry about long-term compatibility, about depth, about consent, about timing. He worries about nothing, and in that void of worry, he becomes magnetic.
Foucault wouldn't call this justice. He'd call it the architecture of power. Unless you understand that women respond to power's performance, not its origin, you'll keep watching the dance from the shadows. You'll remain unseen. Not because you're unworthy, but because you never stepped onto the stage. There's a particular humiliation that haunts intelligent men. It's that moment they realize their understanding of the world doesn't actually give them leverage in it. And nowhere is this more brutally revealed than in attraction. You watch the fool win the room, win her laughter, win her body, and all you're left with is clarity, insight, and a quiet rage. But Foucault would tell you, what you lack isn't worth, it's strategy. You were taught to believe the world rewards those who master knowledge, but Foucault flips the script. Knowledge isn't for collecting. Knowledge is for cutting. In Society Must Be Defended, he argued that knowledge isn't an ornament, it's a weapon. And if you don't know how to use it, you become a museum of intelligence instead of an engine of impact. The so-called stupid man doesn't need theory. He cuts the world open with presence. He dominates not because he's brilliant, but because he's strategically uninhibited. Women feel this. They feel it in the way he looks at them. Not with admiration, but with entitlement. While you're still holding your breath, measuring the right words, he's already touching her waist. It's not that he deserves her. It's that you surrendered the moment you waited for permission.
In The History of Sexuality, Foucault argued, power is exercised rather than possessed. It is not the privilege of the dominant class, but the overall effect of its strategic positions. And here's the dagger. Stupid men often occupy better positions. Why? Because they're loud, they're unashamed. They put themselves in the spotlight, not because they belong there, but because they don't know not to. Their stupidity isn't absence, it's armor. They're not calculating risks, so they're never paralyzed. They're not reflecting on consequences, so they move with raw immediacy. And that immediacy, Foucault would say, is what power looks like in the flesh. Because power isn't silent, it isn't noble, it isn't hiding in books. Power is laughing at the party. Power is dancing terribly, but dancing first. Power is moving without apology. And women don't wait for the man with the best vocabulary. They respond to the man who takes up space.
But here's the deeper sickness. As an intelligent man, you've internalized your own invisibility. You've convinced yourself that not playing the game makes you morally superior. That by staying quiet, by not competing, you're somehow above it all. But this is a lie that keeps you lonely. Foucault warned about this trap. Where there is power, there is resistance. But he never said resistance wins. Most of the time, resistance just isolates you. The stupid man doesn't resist the game. He masters it. His ignorance gives him agility. He doesn't ask if his desire is politically correct or psychologically informed. He just acts. And that's what women see. That's what they feel. That's what they respond to. Your depth becomes your handicap if you don't translate it into social voltage. She can't feel the poetry in your mind if it never leaves your mouth. In this world, power is kinetic. The stupid man moves, you hesitate, and in that tiny delay, the night changes. She changes. You lose her, not to someone better, but to someone faster.
Let's go deeper. Foucault didn't just study prisons, hospitals, or schools. He studied how power wraps itself around bodies, how it choreographs behavior, how it disciplines you without a whip or a guard. You think you're free, but you're not. You're a product of what he called biopower, systems that control populations not through chains, but through norms, through shame, through silence, through the scripts you've internalized about when it's okay to speak, to move, to desire. And here's where the fool beats you again. He doesn't obey those scripts, not because he's a rebel, but because he doesn't even realize they exist. He lives outside the architecture of discipline. He is raw. And in a world sterilized by overthinking and overanalysis, rawness feels like truth. Foucault tells us power doesn't just repress, it produces. It produces reality. It produces domains of objects. It produces rituals of truth. That means even the idea of being a good man was manufactured. Your politeness, your humility, your restraint, they weren't born of pure virtue. They were programmed into you by a system designed to tame you. But desire doesn't obey that system. Attraction doesn't reward manners. Women are not selecting men on virtue. They're responding to vibration. And the fool vibrates without filter.
He doesn't second guess. He doesn't self-edit. He doesn't try to look worthy. He acts like he already is.
This is what Foucault called discursive dominance. He who controls the script controls the scene. The fool doesn't need to write a script. His presence is the message. Meanwhile, you're crafting brilliant monologues in your head, forgetting to actually say them out loud. Let's be brutally honest. You've seen a woman you cared about fall for a man who can barely spell his own name. Why? Because he entered her emotional space without hesitation. He didn't sneak in with credentials, he barged in with boldness. And here's the most painful insight from Foucault. Power is tolerable only on the condition that it masks a substantial part of itself. Its success is proportional to its ability to hide its own mechanisms. That's the killer blow. The fool doesn't look powerful, he feels powerful. Because there's no visible effort, his confidence looks authentic, unmanufactured, real, and that's what seduces. You, the thinker, build your case. He becomes the case. You try to prove you're worthy. He assumes it, and in doing so, he bends the whole encounter around his gravity. She doesn't know why she's drawn to him. She can't explain it. That's because he operates beneath language. He triggers instinct, not logic, and instincts are never impressed by essays. They're moved by rhythm, by dominance, by audacity. You want to be chosen for your mind, but she chooses based on how your presence makes her feel, and the fool, by virtue of his blindness, makes her feel free.
So now you sit there, drowning in your own mind, wondering how the world became this upside-down theater where ignorance wins and intelligence gets punished. But Foucault would tell you, this was never a mistake. This is how the system was built. You've confused intelligence with power. But power, as Foucault saw it, doesn't belong to the rational, it belongs to the functional. And the fool functions better in the social structures that dominate life. He flows with the tide of signals, roles, impressions, and rituals. He doesn't resist the current, he rides it. In The Archaeology of Knowledge, Foucault made a haunting observation. There is not one, but many silences, and they are an integral part of the strategies that underlie and permeate discourses. And that's what's happened to you. You've been silenced by your own awareness. You've swallowed your words. You've second-guessed your desires until they looked like threats. You've waited for permission in a world that only rewards those who take. And in that delay, she moved on. Not because she didn't feel something for you, but because you didn't make her feel something in herself. The fool, in all his idiocy, knows how to make her feel seen. Not because he understands her, but because he doesn't hesitate. His ignorance becomes an engine of experience. He touches without calculating. He speaks without a thesis. He moves without the virus of analysis. And to the woman starving for energy, that rawness feels like truth. You, the intelligent man, try to protect her from your flaws. He wears his flaws like cologne. You try to gently open the door. He kicks it in. You hope your restraint will be respected. He knows her emotions won't wait that long.
And here's the final death blow from Foucault. The soul is the prison of the body. Your mind has become your cage. You've intellectualized your desire so deeply that you don't even know how to express it anymore. You think truth will win her, but she doesn't want to be convinced. She wants to be consumed. So what's the lesson here? Not to become stupid, but to unlearn your obedience to those quiet, invisible norms that have castrated your power. To stop waiting for worthiness to be granted. To stop watching life like a critic and start shaping it like an actor.
Because power isn't found in knowing more. Power is found in doing more, without begging the world to validate your reasons first. If you want to stop losing to the fool, you need to become fluent in the language of immediacy, in boldness, in unapologetic self-claiming. You have to step back into the arena Foucault described, not with a dissertation, but with presence. Women aren't choosing fools because they admire stupidity. They're choosing them because those men know how to move through systems that intelligent men are still trying to decode. Until you learn to act, not after thinking, but as a form of thinking, you'll remain a prisoner of your own brilliance. So you have to choose: remain the wise ghost in the shadows, or finally step onto the stage and become the man who doesn't ask for power, he radiates it.